Sharing stories from the edge where the healing begins.
Welcome to this week's edition of the Old Parachute Podcast, a podcast where we talk to a wide variety of guests from all walks of life, sharing their amazing life stories. If you haven't already, please go to the YouTube channel and the Instagram channel and give the page a follow. I'd really, really appreciate it. Without further ado, today's guest, former paratrooper, former SAS, and current author, the legend that is Des Powell. How you doing, Des?
That's a great introduction. I think I better be good today, Chris. Chris, thanks very much for having me on the show. I really appreciate that.
No, I appreciate you taking the time to come on. We've been back and forth for a little while, trying to sort of pin it down. We talked about busyness, and we're both very, very busy. So, no, I appreciate you making the time to come on. It's always a pleasure of mine to talk to, one, a former paratrooper, two, someone that served with the SAS, and three, someone that's had such a varied and kind of career that you've had. So, no, the pleasure is all mine, pal. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Right, what I like to do, Des, with all the podcasts, is I like to start at the beginning. Seems like the best place to start. Where you grew up, what you was like as a kid, and sort of ultimately what led you down the path you took in life into the military. So, yeah, over to you.
Yeah, I'm a Sheffield guy, born and bred. And I think it's like all these inner cities, Chris, is that you can be led to the dark side or you could be led to the good side. And I had a good mum and dad, and they loved me to bits. People said to me, "Oh, you come from a rough part in Sheffield." But you know something, Chris, we don't see it like that, do we? We just see it as home, And my mum and dad, were, working class, and they did their best. I got a brother, I got a sister. They're raising a family. But yeah, it's so easy, isn't it, to be drawn, to hang about with the wrong crowd and do the wrong things. I remember once, Chris, I got in trouble with the police. Very simple stuff. I must have been about 12, 13-year-old, and I've been throwing some stones, and I smashed some lamps. And you know something, the police got involved, and I think they took me to the house. And I was more upset by the reaction from my mum, than I was being, that the police had caught me. Yeah. And I felt I'd let them down. My mum disgusted as much as we haven't brought you up like this, and you know something, Chris, because of that, I probably never got in trouble again, But Sheffield's, rough, it's ready, but the people are lovely, At that time when I was growing up, when I'm coming up to 14, 15, 16, you had the football hooligans at that time, and I know they brought football to its knees. And in Sheffield, we've got Sheffield United, Sheff Wednesday, haven't we? And never the two should meet. Both great clubs, But there was a lot of problems with the football clubs. There was a lot of lesser violence, if you like, at that time. And it's so easy, again, to get involved in all of that. Luckily, my mum and dad kept a good eye on me and kept me on the straight and narrow. But looking back at it, and I mentioned this in the book, it's a rough time for a youngster, especially in Sheffield. Everybody's got a reputation. Everybody's a tough guy. Everybody's, doing kind of bad things, so to speak. And you are young and impressionable, aren't you? And it's very easy to be led the wrong way. But as I says, I had good people around me, good family. But yeah, Sheffield was a tough, rough place. And I think that is one of the things I think that helped me join the military, because every young guy wants to prove himself. And I've said in Sheffield, everybody wanted to do that. Everybody wanted to show you how tough they were, how big they were, And I thought, something, if I want to prove myself, and I say this even today to youngsters, if you want to prove yourself, to prove how good you are, how big you are, how tough you are, how good looking you are, go and join the military. Because, as you know, Chris, the military has a definitive, doesn't it? It tells you whether you're good enough, or it tells you if you're not good enough. You've got to, it's like a selection process getting into the military. You've got to pass certain things to actually get in, to serve. and it's a proud moment when you actually get into it. So I always say to people today, if you want to prove how good, how tough, how big, whatever you are, go and join the military. It will give you that definitive that you want, or hopefully that you want anyhow. But that was the beginning of Des's journey, if you like. And luckily, I come from a rough part in Sheffield. But sorry, luckily I had people that kept an eye on me, Chris, and kept me on the straight and narrow, because I think if I had to join the military, it would have been so easy to get into a life of lesser crime,
I hear this a lot, Des, and it's a very kind of a similar narrative from a lot of guys that end up joining infantry. Well, the military in general, really, where they kind of bit of a troubled background, kind of a bit lost after a bit of meaning, very impressionable to a certain extent, wrong crowds. I hear a lot. I can certainly resonate with that myself. That was me. It was a path that I probably ended up maybe criminal, maybe being, young offenders for a fight,
yes,
stuff like that.
yes, yeah, yeah,
There's a lot, and like we talked about before, I think the thing with the military is it's very easy to look at it, not knowing what we know now, and think,
yeah,
oh, it's big, it's bad, it's scary. It is big, bad, it's scary. But I believe,
yeah,
as we talked about off air, that I think if most youngsters, male and female, join the military at a young age, 16, 17, just for 6 months or a year, we said 90%, I reckon, would end up staying
yeah.
for longer and enjoying it, because once you get past basic training and you get to your unit, it's just you get paid to see the world. Your experiences are priceless, aren't they?
Agreed. And this, do you know something, Chris? When I look back then, is that the family unit was very, very important. And I think it is today. I think everything starts
Yeah.
from the family unit, it starts from the household, doesn't it? And when I look back, is that the whole family unit, I'm talking about granddads and grandmas and so forth. I remember, I'm going back to when I was 5, 6 year old. A 5 year old, a 6 year old has two emotions. You're either sad or you're happy. And I can remember that there was harmony. My granddad had been in the First World War, okay, and I could see that he was like the head of the family, and obviously my dad had married his daughter, and something, each evening, my mum used to grab my hand and say, "Come on, we're going to go and see Grandad. We're going to see he's all right." And we'd walk down the street, and she'd pop down and say, "Right, Dad," her dad, my granddad, just pop down to see you're all right. You were going to bed soon and stuff. And something, I'd be in the middle of that conversation. I'd be listening to it, and they'd be talking to me, but I could see there was this caring that she cared for her dad and whatever. But then I would see that there was a respect from my dad towards her dad.
Yeah.
Again, he was like the head of the family, but I could see in return that my granddad respected my dad as well. He took on his daughter. So you had this family unit. And I could see when I look back on it, Chris, as I think about it now, they got it covered. They got it sorted out. I had nothing to worry about. My granddad was there, he had a lot of experience. In fact, he'd been gassed in the Second World War, Chris, and
Right.
he got a bad chest. He got a bad chest. So he was always spitting on the fire. So guess what? Little Des used to do the same thing because he watched Grandad. And my mum used to, "What are you doing spitting on the fire?" "When my granddad does it, I can do it." It was that scared. And my granddad would look at me and go kind of like that, But something, I look back, Chris, and it was just wonderful. You just felt safe, secure. You were happy. My dad, by the way, he'd been in national service. My granddad been in the Second World War. My mum, I could see she was happy, and then there was aunties and uncles and so forth. But as far as me being a youngster, amongst all of that, it was just my family's got it covered. I've got nothing to worry about. And then I saw a vast change then, where my granddad died then when I was 7, and then me own dad died in an accident when I was 9. Okay, these things happen, but probably a point I'm making is that I could see a change. All of a sudden the men in the family, the strong men, weren't there now, and I could see that there were things that weren't covered. My
Yeah.
mum did have difficulties. She did struggle. There were people that, in a way, took advantage of the situation. And she had 3 kids to bring up, and the men now weren't in the family now, sort of thing. So But my mum did a good job. The women are strong, especially in Sheffield, as they are, I'm joking, as they are around the country. But, when, a lady is left by herself and she's got 3 kids to bring up, it's surprising, how strong she becomes. But these things happen, I don't turn around and say, well, because of this, I couldn't do that. Because of this, I was disadvantaged. You get on with it. You get on with it, Chris, don't you? And this is what I say to people now, is that it doesn't matter what advantages, especially disadvantages that you have in your family, is that you've just got to get on with it. Of course, me at Sky, Chris, I know we talked about this before we come on, is that the education, I wasn't a person that could say, even today, thank goodness for spell check on doing emails, and thank goodness I've got a very intelligent girlfriend who looks at everything before I said, can you put that in English? But looking back, no, I wasn't educated, and I was very good physically, and or should I say, I like things physical, like football and stuff like that. But I look back at it and I think probably joining the military, because it's a pragmatic way of life, was probably the round peg in the round hole for me. Because, people would say, oh, I think the military would be good for you. Why don't you join? And I go, no, I don't be silly. And by the way, I left school when I was 15, which is a ridiculous age to leave. In fact, I remember, Chris, that a year afterwards, everybody left at 16, But there I was at 15, realizing that, something, I'm not educated. And it's funny, I seem to have the common sense, which I got from my mum and dad, seem to know that I need at one stage in my life to get myself educated to move on. I seem to know that education was important. I knew I wasn't, I knew I wasn't stupid. I just knew that I wasn't educated. So I knew at some stage I was going to have to go to college or knuckle down to an apprenticeship, which it was at that time. So I left at 15. I did varied jobs, first job stacking shelves in a supermarket. Next one, I was a butcher in a shop. After that, I was an hammer driver in Sheffield, bashing down big ingots. That suited me more. I was getting closer to the job that I wanted to do. I like the idea of getting my hands dirty, And everybody's thing, Chris, about I come from Sheffield, it's the steel city. Everything happened from Sheffield. We made steel, and that made the world go round, sort of thing. In the military, when I used to travel, I used to do a trick where people would be eating with knife and forks. And I used to say, I know exactly where them knife and forks have come from. And they'd look at me and I'd say, Sheffield, have a look on it now. And they'd look at knife and forks. Of course, it says Sheffield without even me looking at it, And I used to feel quite proud of that I come from the steel city. So looking back, when I left school at 15, then wondering what am I going to do, stacking shelves. No, I don't know the thing to do. Being a butcher, quite like that, And then I'm a driving in Sheffield. Then I went to work for English Steel itself, property repairing. Then from there, I started to work on building sites, tarmacking. Then I was a hod carrier. So I was doing all the labouring jobs all the way up to about the age of 19, And then I was working down south, down in Powell, and I was helping on building sites, and particularly I was helping this bricklaying, and in them days it was a hod carrier looking after a couple of bricklayers or whatever, running up and down the ladder, getting them cement, mixing up cement and taking them bricks and what have you. And at dinner time, I was sat there taking in the sun and looking out in the Poole Harbour, I could see these boats going woof, woof, like that. And I thought, ooh, that was quite interesting. That, of course, it was the Marines down there, weren't it? And then I started to work into the centre of Bournemouth. I was down there doing some work, and I would see the big lorries with Marines on the side. And I really took a shine to that. And I got talking with a local guys I was working with, and they go, oh, yeah, the Marines, they're a good bunch of guys, this, that, and I thought, ooh, I quite fancy that. And, it's very physical. Oh, yeah, those guys. So I took an interest towards that. I was coming up to about the age of 19 then, and someone persuaded me and said, why don't you go to the careers office? And of course, you get them fears that I've talked about in the book, the 2 fears, the fear of, am I good enough? And the other fear of, what if I fail? Well, guess what? Guess if you are good enough, and guess if you do succeed, Anyhow, I went to have the test and I failed it. I failed the test, didn't I? And the Marine guy was ever so good with me. He says, I think at that time, Chris, they won't let you take the test straight away. You had to wait 6 months. And he said to me, look, you can come back in 6 months' time. Or he says, why don't you have a chat with my Army careers friend, colleague? And he says, because I've got a feeling you're eager to get in the military. And he says, the Army has a lot of potential, sort of thing. And he put me on to the Army careers guy. And we got on like house on fire. And straight away, after an interview with him, he said, I know what you'd be good to join. He says, it's the Parachute Regiment. And I goes, I says, do they jump out in airplanes? I says, that sounds a bit scary. I said, I don't know whether I fancy that. And he laughed at me and he said, by the time you jump out of an airplane, you will be more than ready. He said, And I said to him, I goes, are those guys good? Are they tough? Are they like the commandos? I remember saying something really naive like that, And he goes, those guys are probably the best in the British forces, he says. And of course, that kind of, ooh. He says, and it was at that time then, he says, there's another bunch of guys who are just as good, maybe even better. And I says, who are those? And he says, those guys are called the SAS. And that was the first time I'd heard of that. And I says, who are those guys? He goes, you don't need to know about it. He says, firstly, you can't go for them until you've been in the military for some years. He says, let's concentrate on getting you into the paras, shall we? And I always remember him kind of talking to me like that. He was very good. He seemed to know my strengths, and it was definitely the round peg in the round hole. That guy did his job, Chris, because he come from another regiment. I think it might have been the engineers or something like that. And he could have sold his regiment. He could have said, you need to come here, etc. As you sometimes see, you sometimes see this in careers office, and I understand why they're doing it, And but he was doing his job, and I can always thank him because he was very passionate, and I could see he really wanted me to get in. And I give a story in the book where, as I then do my 6 months training, and the last month I'm at Bryce Norton doing my parachuting, and as you know this, in the hangar, and over the top of the hangar at Bryce Norton, it says, knowledge dispels fear when you learn to do your parachuting. And all of a sudden, I seen this guy walking towards me. This is after 6 months training, and I'm just finishing off my jumps. And I see this guy smiling as he's walking towards me. And of course, it was the guy from the careers office. And he walked straight up to me and he put his hand out and he shook my hand. And it took me a few seconds for it to register. By that time, I'm well kind of, I've gone through the system 6 months, etc., done a few jumps under my belt. And you've got to do 8 jumps, haven't you, Chris, And he said, and the first thing he said to me, he says, I knew you would do it. He says, I knew you would. He says, when you come into the careers office, of course it clicked. I goes, oh, careers guy, And he goes, see, he says, I do what I advise other people to do. He says, I've come to get me wings. And what had happened, he'd obviously come to the end of his career. I was, he was in his last few months, and he joined the TA. And in the TA, he wanted to take his wings. He wanted to the P company. So he took his wings, and he come to Bryce Norton to take his parachute wings, And I thanked him. I says, oh, thanks a lot, mate. And he says, this is quite unique. He says, we never see anybody. He says, after they come in the careers office, he says, I never see him again. And he said, for you, he says, I knew you would get in. And he says, I know you're going to go on to better things. I shook his hand and that was it. Never saw him again. But that guy did his job. And isn't it funny, Chris? I'm telling that story is because, have you noticed in life, there's always moments that you can remember that were probably very important times in your life that was on a balance. You could have either gone down the left fork or the right fork, to the left avenue, to the right avenue. And luckily I took the right one, and it was because of him. He could have, I was so, I didn't know what to do. He said, Parachute Regiment is for you. This will suit you. It's your personality. I can guarantee you'll be ready by 6 months. You will go on. You will do great things, etc., etc., etc. And obviously, I'm here today talking to you, telling that story. So I can always thank him.
Yeah, and that you're right there. When you walk in that army careers office, a lot of the time, they kind of. I think it was some years ago, and correct me if I'm wrong. There'll be some viewers that might be able to tell me different, but I thought that you got monetary if you got someone into your unit. There was like a monetary incentive to the people in the army careers office. So the guy on when I walked in was a grenadier guard, and he was like, "You're a
Yeah.
big lad, you'd make a great grenadier guard." But I was hell bent on joining the parachute. It was nice that bloke was like, he saw potential in you, or he kind of
Yeah.
he could have
Yeah.
gone and said, no, 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 you don't want to join them, you want to join
Yeah.
mine, and it'd have been a wrong choice for you.
It would, and do you know something, Chris? He did his job. My granddad did his job. My dad did his job. We've got job roles. I was talking to the girlfriend the other day. I said, "You give me a job role," and she laughs like, yeah, clean the dishes, do this, that, But we do. Us as men, we need to have, we need job roles. We have roles in this life, and a lot
Yeah,
of it is okay. Let's name a couple. We've got to provide, we've got to protect, and that is generally our family. As my girlfriend says, yeah, it's true. You do have a job role, Des. She says you don't have to physically do it, okay, but you go through the motions of doing it, so to speak. Your intentions are to look after me. Your intentions are to provide. Your intentions are to protect. And I think is that as youngsters, not to get lost, to go down that wrong route. As I said, I could have easily gone to the dark side and gone into crime. But then everyone could have. It's not just me. I'm not just talking about a unique story, and I'm not just talking about, when my grandfather died and my dad died early. This has happened to thousands, so it's not a unique story. And I say this to people: there's nothing special about what's happened in my life as such. Is that we are all there, and we all have to make the right choices. And by making the right choices, by having, let's say, a family unit around you, okay, to give you the basics, and then coming across people that do their jobs correctly, okay, have a job specific role. And this guy had a specific role, and he did his job properly, and he sent me on my journey, and I can always thank him for that. And wasn't it nice when I saw him that he wanted to do the same thing? He got it in his mind that before I leave the military, I've got to go and get my wings. And it shows you the importance of how people look at the airborne brotherhood. For such as him, I want to do this before I get out. He must have been on his 22nd year, full term in the military is 22 years. And he thought that was important. And to me, it's important. It's important to you. And we're still talking about it today, Chris. And I think, when I see a lot of youngsters, who do get lost, and I have quite a few of my friends who say, "Oh, will you talk to my son?" and 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 even at a book signing the other day, I was talking to a lady who wants to join us as an officer, very keen, and I want to do this and do that. And I'm going, go for it. Yes, go for it. I says, nothing's going to stop you with that sort of mindset. But I realized, like such as me, I was kind of reluctant. It's only until I got in the military, in the paras, when now I get it. Now I understand it. I've been exposed to this. I am the round peg in the round hole. Yes, it is hand in glove. This is what I wanted to do, but I needed people to shunt me, to do their right thing, to do their job, to put me in the right position till eventually I have to take the jump, don't I? I have to make that decision, And once I got in the military, once I got into para reg, especially para reg, then I go, yeah, this is it. This is what I want to do. This is my life. And of course, I'd been resisting the military for years, if you like, where people are going, go, no, no, oh God, no, I'm not going to have anybody shout at me. I'm not going to have anybody tell me what to do with my life, if though I know everything. But it's this naiveness, isn't it? And people often say to me, well, did you have anyone that had the military influence? And I said no. But when I look back, when my granddad had been in the military, and he was running the family, kind of organized and sensible, and with respect, and providing and protecting, okay, and looking after the family. Of course, those are right, the civilian traits, but particularly military traits, aren't they? And
yeah,
then my father, he'd been in national service, and obviously I could see the harmony, the respect within the family. Again, so I'd bound to have been influenced by, let's say, the military systems that these two guys had been in. So eventually, because I'd had that good down-to-earth common sense, I eventually joined the military, and that was Parachute, and I can fully thank that guy, or them people, if you like. It was a unification of their efforts that eventually got me in the military, Chris.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, we did touch on before as well, there's all them factors there. And I suppose a bit on the flip side is as well, I similar sort of upbringing to yourself, my family, working class, absolutely great, good values, worked hard, common sense, that sort of stuff. So again, I had them sort of values instilled in me from a young age, which kind of helped me. But also, you do get the other end of the spectrum where you have these people that have had no kind of role models in their life. And the first role model that they encounter would be someone in a depot force group that's like a positive male role model in their life, And I think the other aspect there is we talked about that fear factor, and how I think people don't like that feeling that they get, the butterflies, as you quite rightly said off air, it's the butterfly feeling, or that feeling of feeling uncomfortable or feeling a little bit nauseous or that stomach pain before. So I think a lot of people, probably a large percentage of people, do not like that feeling, so they don't put themselves out the comfort zone. But joining the military or doing anything out there requires that putting yourself out there, that feeling uncomfortable. And you'll know full well where I'm coming from when you're rocking up at that train station. For you back in the day would have been older shot, and being there, that feeling, if you could bottle up that feeling, I mean, it's horrendous, but it's exciting, and it's horrible, isn't it?
It's horrendous. It is, yeah. When I look back, and let's face it, Chris, there's two fears, isn't there? Really, there's only two fears. There's that fear I mentioned earlier on, am I good enough? And that fear then, what if I fail? And you know something, Chris, even today, up until, now, I still get those feelings, and I have to kind of catch myself and go, hang on a minute, stop. I'm going, well, and you have to remind yourself of what you've done. So, of the things that we've done and not sticking our chests out. All right, we've been about a bit, we've seen a bit. We speak from experience. Let's just say that, Chris, don't we? We've traveled the world. We are worldly travel. Let's just put it like that. But even today, it shows you how natural that feeling is, because it still comes back. People often say to me, well, you can't be scared, Des. You've jumped out of airplanes and you specialise in altitude 3-4 parachuting when you went to Hereford, SAS and what have you. I said, you've got to be kidding. I says, I feared it every single time I did it. When I was in Parachute static line, I feared it then. Even today, you fear writing an email unless someone thinks I'm stupid because I've spelt things properly. As I said, thank goodness for spell check. I think fear is a natural thing. I think what is good that I've learned to do, and of course you read about this all the time now, is that you've got to learn to harness that fear and overcome it. There was a book come out years ago by a lady called Susan Jeffers, and she called the book Feel the Fear But Do It Anyhow. And I remember buying that book and reading about it, I think 20 years ago. And she talks in the book about it's normal. Fear is normal. And you've got to feel that fear, actually feel it, feel the awkwardness, how, as you just said, it feels horrendous, it feels difficult, you feel like you can't do anything, but you've got to experience it. And then after a while, you do it over and over again, and you go, well, I've experienced this fear. I know I've got to feel these butterflies. I know now I've got to head into that fear, and I know I've got to experience that difficulty. And eventually you get through it. And that's what I've learned to do. I mentioned about it in the book. And especially when I found this fear, Chris, when it was at its highest, is when in Parachute I'd travel the world, been Hong Kong and Cyprus, and going out to Latin America and doing some great things with Parachute but then there was a crossroads round about the 7th, 8th year mark. I started to think, do you know something? I better think of my career, because I was coming up to the end. In those days, you could join up for 3 years, for 6 years, and for 9 years. I joined 9 years because it was more money. And I thought, plus as well, 3 years will go like that. 6 years, you would have probably wished, oh, I should have signed up for 9. And but I was coming up to 9 years, so around about the 7-year mark, I'm thinking I've got to make a decision, you know. And it's not like you can tell them on the last day, Chris, is it? You know. So I thought to myself, right, 3 options: get out into Civvy Street, which scared me. I got a lot of butterflies over that one because I thought I'm going back to what I already know, and I didn't quite like that feeling, you know. Although it was tempting, that was an option. As you know, in the military we have options, don't we? So option 1 was Civvy Street, you know. The second option was to stay in Para Ridge, and that was a great enough option. I thought, well, I know what I'm going to do. You know, most guys, you know, will become a sergeant major in 22 years, and I looked at that one very seriously, you know. And then a lot of people had been saying, like what they'd done when I first joined the military, why don't you go to Hereford? You know, why don't you do this? What, you know, but as usual, the fear kicked in. I don't think I'm good enough, and what if I fail? And as you know, at that time, there was hardly any info about going up to Hereford. No one knew anything. The only way I got information, Chris, was to wait for guys to go up there, fail, come back. Then I would go and see them and then say, right, you know, how did you do? How far did you get? You know, like a lot of guys would get halfway through, come back after the jungle, and then I would go and see them. But I never seemed to get the information that I wanted, Chris. And you know, guys would say, oh, well, you know, it's no, you can't do this. And I would think, well, if it's not you can't do, there's a lot of people failing this. I mean, there's 90% failure rate, you know, and then one day, you know, it's always getting these fears, you know, and I thought, well, I don't want to go to Civvy Street, and I kind of, I thought, well, I'll stay in Para Ridge, and as you know, if you want to push your career further, you want to get more serious in the military, Hereford is a great option, isn't it, Chris? You know, and I thought I want to get serious about my soldiering, and of course I'd heard everything about the regiment, but at first it was scaring me. I'm thinking these guys are a bunch of nutters. You know, I don't want to go up there. You know, you hear all sorts of stories and what have you. And plus, while I was in Para Ridge, I remember a couple of occasions I saw guys from, like the first time I saw a guy from the SAS. I remember looking at this guy and thinking, oh, Z, you know, I was in camp, and I could see that firstly he looked different. You know, for a start he hadn't shaven, his hair was longer, he'd got a different uniform on, and he was wearing a different beret. And I remember saying to a guy, I think I mentioned this in the book, and it was a very dramatic term that he used, you know. And I said to him, "What are those guys?" He goes, "You don't need to know about those guys." I go, "You don't be daft, were they?" He goes, "Those are the SAS." He goes, "They deal in the death business," which was a very ridiculous phrase to use. But it got my attention. And I go, and this was the second time I'd heard about the SAS. Now, that may sound strange within Para Ridge, but as you know, in Para Ridge, we are just Para Ridge. Everybody else is a crap hat, aren't they? We don't deal with any other regiment. We are it. You're either in the Paras or you're in Civvy Street. There's no in between. Of course, that was the first time I'd kind of really seen an SAS guy. And it kind of intrigued me. For a start, I'd learned later that he'd come from Para Ridge. He knew everyone. Everybody was kind of, how are you, and stuff. And he was, you know, he just looked different. And I thought, oh, you know, and I kind of found out more about it. And then I saw another guy about a year or so later. He was an officer. And again, he looked completely different. And I thought to myself, this is more about a mindset, I can see. This is different. These are not just average soldiers. This is, and of course, this intrigued me. So I just found as much information about it as I could. And then going back to that story where guys were going on selection and coming back, one particular day, one guy come and knocked on my bunk. I was down Depot Para, and I was a PT instructor down there. So I was doing a 2-year tour down there, being a physical training instructor. I'd already let the adjutant know in Para Regiment, I was in 1 para at the time, saying, I'm thinking of going to Hereford. And he says, I tell you what, why don't you have your posting down to Depot? He says, that would be a good staging post for you to kind of then get all the information you need, your fitness, your exposure, and why don't you leave for selection then? I thought, oh yeah, that's a good idea, good advice from the adjutant, you know, and that's what I did. So I got all this information down at depot. I brushed up on my weapon training, my map reading. You've got all the instructors down at depot, haven't you? You know, and I got my fitness even better. I was a PT instructor, so I was doing physical all the time. And then one day I got a knock on my bunk, and there was a guy stood there I'd never seen before. And he said, Des, you know, my name is so-and-so. I've heard you wanted to go on selection. Come down to my house tonight. He was in the pads. He was a married guy. And he says, I'll tell you all about it. And I went down, had a cup of tea with him, and spent a couple of hours with this guy. And he told me everything I needed to know. He'd come off at the jungle stage. And what he did, he handed me like a little book. And what he'd done like a diary of the things, of what he kind of went through, you know. And he says, there you go, Des, you know, best of luck. I know you're going to do well. By the way, he gave me his jungle boots. He gave me equipment. He told me what to do, what not to do. For the first time, Chris, I come across someone that was just up front and said it as it were. He said, this is going to be the hardest thing you've ever done. He said, you need to commit. And he said, you've got to commit like you're not going to come back. Don't go up there and say you're going to give it a go. Go up there and say you're not coming back. He says, and I kind of looked at him just as we left, and I says, what about you? He says, I've got to have some rest at the moment. He says, I'm going to go back and have a second go in the future. And but I had a feeling even then that he weren't, you know, because he kind of really opened up about it, was really sincere, and kind of giving me his jungle boots and stuff and what have you. I'm thinking, you know, I don't think he is like, you know. And it was only later on when I did my second selection that I understood why he didn't go up. You just needed that rest. So from then, he gave me a confidence, if you like, to go and go for it. And but it was that fear. It was that fear. I don't think I'm good enough to go to the SAS. And then there was another fear on top of that, well, what if I fail? Because all I'd ever seen, Chris, was guys go to Hereford but come back. I only ever saw just the odd one, and not many in my time when I was at depot for 2 years, and they do 2 selections a year, don't they? A winter one and a summer one. Is that I saw guys go up there and stay there. Just about everyone that left depot would always come back. And I had this guy then that sat me down, tell me as it really were, and kind of tell me, he said, you've got to get your head in this. Don't just go up and think you're the fittest thing going, because by that time I was very fit. I was, you know, and, you know, I was on the PT staff then, and we were doing tabbing every day and stuff. But you soon found out that it's not just about carrying weight. There's a big mental element to it. And hence, you know, I know we've been talking about that. So the fear side, Chris, long-winded way of answering your question with a story, if you like, is that we all feel it. It's natural. What I did, I think, when I went to Hereford is learn to embrace it and go, this is going to be a time like when I come through, that guy did his job. That was a pivotal moment of me going into the Para-Reg. Now coming up to 8 years later, 7, 8 years later, I'm going on selection. And I knew this was going to be a big decider. And I knew that I had to get my head right and everything and prepare. And I knew that it was going to be the hardest thing I'd ever done. And I knew there was a big fear factor in my body building up, and I knew that I had to control it. If I didn't control it, I would fail. And I think, Chris, in my opinion, I think a lot of people that went up on selection in the past would talk themselves out of it because of this fear factor, okay, yeah, which plays an enormous part, you know, in going on selection, and then therefore plays an important part in your life of the things that you do. Because when I look at the things that I've done over the years, you know, I've coming from Sheffield and surviving, kind of not going the wrong way, if you like, thank my family, to then getting the right guy that got me into Para-Reg military. And I wasn't designed at the beginning. It was only until I was exposed to it that I went, yes, this is what I want to do. Then enjoying myself in Para-Reg and seeing that I had confidence in the potential in the future to become a sergeant major, you know, and then having that exposure to, well, I want to better myself and possibly go to SAS, and then having a life of 20 years then in the SAS, then having 10 years on the circuit, okay, and then looking after VIPs and celebrities and the likes. And then here I am writing books and talking to you, is that at every stage, there's a massive fear factor that stops most people.
Yeah.
And in a lot of cases, it was stopping me. And what I've learned to do, Chris, and not be an expert at it, I don't think you ever do become of it, but a lot of people ask me this, so I'm kind of laboring this topic, is that I feel if you can conquer this fear, as I say, you don't have to be expert, but recognize it, understand it, understand how your body feels, understand why you're getting the butterflies, why you don't want to, why you want to push away from it, why you want to go in the opposite direction, etc., etc. Once you learn how to get into that zone and really zone into it, okay, is that I think there's a success format there. I really do. And we hear about it all the time. People go, yeah, Des, but this is nothing new. No, it's not. It's not new, but it's new to you. It's new to you, Chris. It's new to every individual. We can talk about it and underline it and treble underline it as much as we can. But until you actually feel it, but not only feel it, you want to go to something. And for me, going to the SAS was the most important thing in my life. That is what I wanted to do. So I wasn't going to let this fear stop me. Or at least, okay, I was going to give it my very, very best. So on this subject of fear, I think it is a topic that is important. I think people, if they want to be successful in life, and success is relative. I know we talk about it in monetary terms and what have you, but the things that we've done, Chris, not being a big one, money hasn't bought the things that we've done. There's many things in life that money doesn't buy. Many things. Would you agree with that, Chris? Yeah. Many things in life. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I'm not a big believer in, like, people say, I believe money is important, but money is important because it allows me to then do the things that I really want to do.
Correct.
It's not my driving force. My driving force is the possibilities that it may perhaps bring. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is. Money generally does two things. It gives you freedom. For me to get up and have a podcast, and have a really good conversation, and pass some good info on to people that are asking, which is, I feel privileged to do that. So freedom to do what I want. And the second one is security. Let's say you have enough money that you can generally tend to do, what you want. And and a lot of people don't have that. And I think by overcoming that fear or being able to control it is that it gives you that monetary freedom. You understand things differently. As I say, monetary, I think all the time. I don't think I ever thought about money once over the 20 odd years that I was in the military until I got out. I didn't think about it when I got in. I only thought about it as I got out, Chris, and you was probably the same, because I was just enjoying the journey, Chris. That fantastic journey that we've had. And as I said, money doesn't buy that. But on the subject of fear, it quashes all of that. It quashes it. It stops you from doing what you really want to do. So if you can conquer that fear, of way how you deal with it individually, okay, and I learned, even today, I still feel that fear. I still get them butterflies. But I've learned to just got to step into it. They reckon that as you walk away from fear, is that the worse it becomes. If you step into it, it gets better. It's not. How many times have you done something, Chris? For your audience that are listening, is that how many times have we done something, we've been fearful, and we've gone, almost 9 times out of 10, we've gone, do you know something, that wasn't as bad as what I thought it was going to be. You know what I mean? Always. It's just, because your mind conjures up the worst scenario. It conjures up the worst scenario, it does, doesn't it, of the worst thing that could ever happen, or whatever it's going to be. And of course, for me, going for selection, I'm talking myself out of it before I even went there, But luckily, I prepared well. Luckily, I come across, particularly this particular person that sat me down and kind of just told me straight. It just clicked me into that zone, and in a way, Chris, what I did when I went to Parachute, I kind of burnt bridges. I don't know whether it was the good thing to do, but I told everybody I weren't coming back. And I kind of said, if I am going to come back, I'm going to get out into Surrey Street. And in a way, I kind of went, ooh, maybe I shouldn't have said that. But what it did, it made me even more determined, And but then it's
you've had a word with yourself. You've given yourself the motivation to then, and you've put yourself in that position where not only is like you've put more pressure on yourself, but like you say, inadvertently, that's probably made you more determined, hasn't it?
Yeah, it has. And just to take the story further, is that I went on selection the first one, but I got injured in the jungle, and of course it doesn't matter; it's still a fail. I got injured in the jungle, and of course you only have 2 goes at selection. So now I've lost one life, if you like. I've got one more life left, and I remember then having a chat with the training major at Hereford, and he says, unlucky Des, he said, but we'd like you to come back again and take a year off or so, have a rest, and then come back. Okay, and now it clicked on me why that guy who gave me the information, why I went up, he needed a rest. Okay, because now I'm absolutely spent. But what I did, I said to the training major, I said, can I come back on the next winter selection? And he said, Des, we wouldn't advise that. We advise you to take a year off, okay, and then come back on the selection of your choice, winter or summer. I says, can I come back on the very next winter one? So I'd just done the winter one, coming up to the 6 month, I'd failed in the jungle with an injury. So that means I've got 6 months training to do before I go on to the next one. People don't do that, Chris, because it takes so much out of you. And I did, at that time, it could have been seen to do a silly thing, but there was method in my madness. Firstly, I said to the training manager, can I come straight back? And he says, if you want to, you can do. I advise you not to. I said, I'd like to. And he says, well, what's the reason, Des? I goes, I know that if I go back to Para-Reg, I'm going to get back into work. I'm going to have to concentrate on the job I've got to do back in Para-Reg, and I'm going to lose momentum. And I'm going to finish up not coming back. I says, if I can go straight back to them and let them know that you've given me permission to come straight back, I says, that would be a tremendous help. And he says, okay. Luckily, the training major was ex-Para-Reg, okay, and he'd been in the regiment for some years, and he knew me. He used to be my major when he was a captain or so when he was in Parachute Regiment, and he knew me. So what I do like, he, again, other things, no, he wasn't doing any favoritism. What he was doing, he knew my disposition. He kind of knew that I was a determined guy. And he understood what I was about, and he understood Para-Reg. And I could see him look, and he kind of knew that if I got back to Para-Reg, they would have their pound of flesh, because, for your audience, is that Para-Reg don't like you to leave them, do they, Chris? They don't like you going off to anywhere, and especially to the SAS. They see it in a way as an abandonment, and the training major understood this. I said, can I come straight back? And he goes, yes, you can. He knew me personally. He remembered me in Para-Reg. He says, unlucky Des, come back on the second one. He did, and he let me then, right. So then I went back to Para-Reg, and I remember the very first day, and I went to see the Sergeant Major. And, he welcomed me back, and Des, unlucky, tell you what, you're here now, get settled in, have a year or so, and then I don't know what your plans are, but, what do you want to do? Maybe you go on selection in a year's time. And luckily, again, it's funny how these people that I keep talking about, that are in positions that can either say yes or say no, and luckily, like the training major said, yes, you can come back. Now I've got to get the permission from the sergeant major back in Parachute Regiment, because he could have gone, no, we need you back here. We're short of men. We want to do this, that, and the other. And at that time, one para had a role where they were out in Norway. And I knew that I was going to lose momentum going out there. I think they had a 2-year tour or so, and I was just joining it at the beginning. And I went to see the sergeant major, and again, I can really thank him. And I looked at him, I goes, look, I've got to be truthful with you. I've got to go straight back. I've had permission from Hereford to go straight back. After a few months training, I want to go back on the winter selection. And he looked at me and he says, are you sure about that, Des? I go, yes. And he goes, can I ask why? Most sergeant majors won't ask, they just go, no, you do as you're told, you're back here, you failed, that's it. Get in the company, get some work done. But again, he listened to me and I goes, look, I know I can do this. Okay, I just need permission. I know I can do it. I don't want to lose momentum. I want to start training straight away. I want to go on, so this was, let's say July time or something like, June, July time, like now. And he could have even said, well, you're going to have 6 months with us and then you go on selection in January of I think it was 86 at that time. And he said, and he could just see it in my eyes. I said, look, even if I do come back, I don't think I'm not going to stay with Parareg, but I need this. I've got to go. This is what I want to do. And I'm burning bridges. And he kind of looked at me, he paused, and he goes, yeah, okay, I understand. And I can thank him. He's no longer with us now. A really nice guy, called Kev Whittle. And I remember he'd been promoted to a new Sergeant Major at that time, and I remember seeing him and thinking, "Whoa, what great!" I know Kev, and he could have said no, but he wasn't that sort of guy. He was a good. I heard he was a good Sergeant Major, and he gave me permission. He goes, "Okay, Des, I understand," and he let me go from that day. I only come back to Parareg for 1 day, and he said, "Yep, you can go," and again, he was in a position that could have really messed me up. He could have said no. And I could have got all funny and I could have gone, firstly, I could have gone, I don't want it, I'm getting out, which wouldn't have been the thing to do, which would have been a bit silly. Or probably more realistically, Chris, I would have gone back to Parareg, started work, lost momentum. And this is what I understand about the guy who knocked on my bunk door, where he wasn't ready for going back straight away. I could see he needed a rest. And even for me, I needed a rest. When I went back and started selection, there were times when I didn't have anything in the tank. It was just that mindset where I just knew this is what I wanted. But this is where I talk about the strength of the mind again, where I knew I needed a rest. But in my mind, I thought, this is what I've got to do, Chris, and this is what I've got to do now. So just to recap, I went on first selection, come back, failed, went on the second selection, and eventually it got in. By the way, on the second selection, I got injured in the jungle again. Okay, but luckily I'd only got a couple of days left in the jungle, so I got through this time. So yeah.
Logic. I do recognise your logic there with coming back to Power Rage. And again, I know Power Rage, like a lot of the viewers will. And it is, they kind of, they want you to stay. They recognise good soldiers. They recognise career possibilities. They reckon, come back. You would have been at a certain age. You would have been juniors. Then probably seniors as the progression goes. And yourself, juniors and seniors are tough courses. So you've got a window.
Very,
Time after
very.
50, you start looking at seniors. It's a hard course. It takes it out of you. I mean,
Incredible.
I was at dizzy heights of Lance Corporal in my time, but it would have been that element of coming back and getting comfortable, wouldn't they? I think would that be the term as well? Getting comfortable in Power Edge, that ease,
Yes.
not easy, but battalion life, that routine. Whereas then you've got to shock yourself again. You've got to start fresh with the fear factor. Whereas you've already got it in your brain, right? I am going back, so you don't get comfortable, do you?
No, you've got it exactly there, Chris, using that word, getting comfortable. I knew I had that experience, I'd come up to 8 years of Parareg, and I knew how the system worked. And I knew myself as well. I knew what it took, Chris, for me to actually get to that position of volunteering, putting pen to paper, of going to the SAS. And I'm thinking, and it took just about everything, from me just to kind of persuade me to do that. And I'm thinking, if I get back now into the battalion, it's going to kind of take all that effort. And as you say, I'm going to get too comfortable. I'm going to kind of, do I really need to go there? I'm enjoying myself in Parareg. I know what my route's going to be. I'm going to become sergeant, staff sergeant, then I'm going to be, colour sergeant, then I'm going to be sergeant major. And then, the possibility that I could be RSM, etc., etc. And you just go, well, and that's an amazing route to follow, and quite a hard route, But for me, my decision was that I'd made that route, and I thought, I've got to do it my way. I know how I respond. I know, if you give me the opportunity, I'll do what I need to do. I know what it takes to get through this. I knew myself then. I knew my psyche. I knew my body. I'd been in Parachute. I classed myself as an experienced soldier at that time. And I thought, I can do this. Okay, but just let me do it my way. And I know I can do it. Okay, I failed the first one. I was unlucky. That was an injury. Okay, now let me go back. And some people say, well, it's got to be easier doing it the second time around. No, it's not. You know everything what's coming, and that makes it even harder. Only in terms of the only thing that's you get that familiarity is that you know what's coming, but that's even harder because you go, oh no, I've got to go through. Let's face it, everything is pain.
Yeah.
You're just controlling pain. That's all you're doing, and it's the pain of long marches, the pain of bad necks, back, knees. Do you know, even today, someone talked about, their bodies being bad. And I have an analogy that, when you start the car up, when you turn the dash and it comes up on the dash, petrol, water, fluid. Well, for me, I wake up in the morning, I go neck, back, shoulders, knees, and of course, you're just controlling pain all the time, and I knew that, and in Parachute, we are always controlling pain. Everything we do is painful. And I knew then it was, I go, right, I know my body. I know what I've got to do. I need these people to say yes. So I had a training major at Hereford say yes. And now I've got the sergeant major of my company saying, yes, I can. So now I was ready to do the second selection. I went on that, and luckily I managed to get through, Chris.
There's two things I can take away from that, or I can't obviously with selection. I've never been on selection, but about 2006, 2007, 2008, I think it was. I was working on the circuit, and I wanted to join back up. I'd read Three Para's book about 2006, the Afghan tour, and I had this in my head, regret of not going on selection myself. So I was going to join back up Parachute as through like an FTRS, like reserve service.
Yes.
Staying on and then going on selection at 20. I think I was 28 years of age. That's what I was doing.
Yeah.
And I got there, and I'd spent one day at the Chilwell barracks nearby me, and I asked myself a series of questions, and it was, if I get into Parachute, I was too comfortable to go back. I was already working on the circuit. I had jobs on the circuits, and long story short, I got offered to go back into Parachute. Yep, no problem. Blah blah blah. But I'd had an offer from a company of $135,000 working in Iraq on convoys, and I was just like, "What do I take here?" And that was it. And I knew if I'd have got in and gone on selection, I knew full well if it got hard in my head, I'd have gone, "What am I doing here?" I've got jobs here, and I think sometimes that's your only option. Like my best friend went on selection; he was on his arse, he was debted up. He went, and that was his only choice of what he could do. His missus had left him, all sorts. So it was like it was pass or not. I know full well it had got the better of me, and I wouldn't have done it.
I think, Chris, and you're looking as mentioned. When I said earlier on, is that, when you're a young guy, you just want to prove yourself all the time. You want to see how good you are against this world and whatever it is. And I'm not just talking about the military. I'm talking about anything. But a military is a good yardstick, into it's a good way of measurement. It gives you the definitive. Let's just say that, And I think, as a young man, I keep hearing this thing about seasons. We have seasons in our lives. Let's just talk ages, if you like, from 18 up to 20 yard, and then 20 yard, up to middle 20s, 26, and then 26 up to 30, and so on. Like those are seasons, but your mind changes at each one. And I think at each one of those areas, those seasons, you've got to accomplish what you need to accomplish at that time within that season. Have you got me so far? Yeah?
Yes.
And I think, Chris, once you've completed that season, that puts you up and prepares you for the next season, and then for the next season. And when I look back at what I did, if I'd had left it any longer in Parachute, I could see that I would have just said, I'll stay, and I'll go and have a great career. And reach sergeant major in Parachute, which is a great career, and you can have a great time. And I would have done that. Luckily, because I was getting a bit old at that time. I was 28 when I went up to Hereford. That was fairly old. Even, a lot of guys said that to me, and I was just on the edge, starting to get comfortable, and you started to feel the limitations of your body at that time as well. You picked up quite a few injuries by that time, parachuting and tabbing and stuff. And, we live a physical life. You live a physical life, you're going to get injuries, but them injuries are going to affect you. And especially when you are trying to be at your top game, if you like, and at Hereford, you've got to be at your peak. So I think I peaked at the right time. If I'd left it any earlier, or later, should I say, in the wrong season of my life, I would have said, no, it's not. So the point I'm making is that you've got to do things in your life at the right time. And it's generally at the right age, and I always say to people, obviously, youngsters, have a chat with my son about going to the military days and what have you. First thing I always say, get your education out of the way. Do your education first, whatever it is. Even if it's as high as getting a degree, do that first, even before you think of you've got to do this first. Because I say it will be very hard to come back to that and do your education once you're in the military. You would agree with that, Chris, wouldn't you? And so, yeah. So what I'm saying is that for you, Chris, we can both see that you got out and synced. You got into another season. And it's very difficult to come back to the earlier season because now you've changed, mentality you've changed, things have changed in your life. You may have a family and what these other people you've got to think on, etc., etc., etc. So is when I joined up, in Parachute, it was just me and no one to worry about. I was single, etc., etc. And so I think that again, this fear factor, and again, making the right decisions early, is that you have to do things at the right time in your life. I've been lucky, Chris, and I mean lucky, that I think I've been able to recognize that and know that I have to do it then at that time. For example, let me talk about, I'm writing books. At any time in my life, if anybody had ever said to me, you're going to be writing books, I brought out 2 books now, and I would have said, don't be ridiculous. I'm not going to be writing books and stuff like that. But it was something my girlfriend said. She says, why are you surprised nowadays at this time in your life, this season, if you like, that you are writing books? She says the sort of person that you've been and the sort of route and the people and the area stroke industries that you've come from, the industry, let's say the military, and from Parachute into SAS. She goes, it's your type of disposition. It's your type of mindset. She says you've always got to the top of a hill, but then you're looking at what's at the top of the next hill. And then you go down in the valley for a while, but then you'll come up and what's on the... So she says it's your manner to do that. She says you're writing books because she says you're not going to be sat at home watching Netflix all the time, are you? She's, there's no wrong with that. I watch Netflix, but the thing is that I can see that it's in our manner. Look at you. You're doing podcasts now. You're doing charities. You're doing stuff for the veterans. You're putting water back in the well. It's already in your manner. It's in your disposition, Chris. It's this. You're wanting to do these things because and it's in the right season of your life, sort of thing. And my girlfriend said that. She said you are more relaxed as now. Guess what? It's in the season that you should be relaxed now. You're writing books. You're giving information. She says, this is normal. She says, this is the type of person you are. Recognize this. Okay. And I think, who was it? Plato said, know thyself. He was a bunch of guys who used to knock about with Aristotle, and Plato says, yeah, know thyself. And I think if you know the type of animal you are and know how you respond and know how you react and respond to certain stimuli, I think you're quite a powerful individual. I've learned to understand why I do things and not. And there's a certain psychology to that, isn't there, Chris? And I think, without, I think a lot in it, Chris, is common sense. I really do. I've learned a lot about Des over the years. When I think back to that, what's that saying? The adolescence is wasted on the youth. The amount of time I wasted when I was young. When I look back, I think, did I really do that? did I really say those stupid things? Did I really do those things? But all of a sudden you realize that that's a learning process, Chris, isn't it? It's something that we have to go through. And I said to myself, well, at least I did something positive. Once I kind of worked it out, Chris, or semi worked it out, I could see eventually from doing them jobs when I first left school at 15 and then going over up to 19 and joining the military, all that was to get me where I am today. It's a process that you have to go through, but the earlier you go through it, you understand why you do the things you do. I think, Chris, you and myself, we were designed to do this sort of thing. We were designed to be in the military. I think it fits our mindset, our disposition, if you like. I think that there's a mindset that we wanted to be men, we wanted to prove ourselves, etc., etc. And by the way, for your audience, I'm not saying that everybody has to join Parareg or the SAS. I'm not saying that at all. But what I'm saying is there's always times in life that you've got to prove yourself, or you've got to go for it, or you're going to be fearful, or you're not sure what to do. But it's better, and as you know in the military, we always say, when it gets loud, it's better to do something than not at all. Even doing something might not be the right thing, but it will lead you eventually to do exactly what needs to be done. And I think it's getting back to this, overcoming the fear, is getting involved in it. He's willing to do something until eventually you work it out, and you'll eventually get there. Do you know something? I've dedicated the book, to my mum and dad, and I said something along the lines of, that I can thank them for giving me the good old fashioned, down to earth, common sense for me to work this life out. And if there's anything that I can thank my mum and dad for, is for giving me common sense. I talk to my kids, they're grown up now, and I often said to them, I go, my mum and dad, your grandma or granddad, they gave me this, they told me that, so I am passing that on to you, And I says, it's worked for me, and I know it will work for you. Okay, common sense. In other words, work it out. Sometimes my kids come to me and they go, Dad, I'm thinking of doing this and doing that. And they might be, a little, not too sure. I go, work it out. Work it out. Okay. And my girlfriend says to me, she says, you've got an unusual parenting skill, Des. She says, you won't let your kids sink, okay, or fail. But she says, at the same time, you don't jump in and help them straight away. As you know, it doesn't do you any good a lot of the time. You've got to work it out, haven't you? Life is like that, isn't it? You've got to work it out. So I always go back to that common sense and go, what does that 15-year-old do that left school with no education? Guess what? I'm no further educated than I was then. But, Chris, I've worked it out, haven't I? I've managed to work it out. I've managed to work it out those few years when I was hitting all those jobs I talked about, being a butcher and stacking shelves and being in the steelworks. Then I worked it out when I was in Parareg, and then I worked it out going from Parareg, going to the SAS. Then I worked it out, the things that I wanted to do within the SAS. And then from the SAS, I did transition then into the circuit, as we call it, is, contractor work out in, silly countries where there's conflict, And then I did a period when I was working with VIPs and celebrities, worked it out. And then books, you work it out. And even today, you just have to work it out. People said to me, they go, Des, what is probably the one thing of that success format that you're talking about, which is important? And probably, I think the word for me is desire. Okay. And people go, desire, Des? I go, yeah, it's got to be a burning desire. It's got to, I heard this phrase someone said, I think it was last year I heard it, it's got to keep you awake at night. I remember when I wanted to be in Parareg, the desire to get in. And then I remember going to the SAS, the desire. Okay, so I said to people, you don't need education. You don't need anything flashy, and you don't need special skills. You just need the want, the desire to really, and I'm on about really want to do something, really want to be someone, really want to be, let's say it's in your career, I want this particular career, your relationship, this relationship, finances, I want to earn this amount. If you really want something, if you just put your mind to it, you will find a way. You will find a way. And even if you think I'm not good enough, and I'm scared and whatever, the desire, okay, is the thing that will get you through. In other words, how much do you really want it? It's as simple as that.
Yeah, no, look, they're all, you know what, they're, like I say, and I think with yourself as well, like you've had these experiences and you draw on from the more experience you put in there, the kind of
Yes.
more you've got to draw from as well, haven't you? And I think,
Yes.
you know, sides there, and also I think I make no secret about I do this podcast to raise awareness for mental health. That's one of the big reasons I do it. Obviously, like I said, I get to talk to interesting people like yourself, which I find fascinating. You probably see there where I'm sat here with this expression on my face, just soaking it all up, But it's just you've got to the mental health thing for me, and just life in general. I feel like you've always got to be pushing forward. You've always got to be challenging yourself. If you're not challenging yourself, or you're trying to make, put yourself out the comfort zone, challenge yourself, a new thing, I think you're stagnating. And I've certainly found with me, and maybe you'll resonate with this, Des, is like if I'm not concentrating or focusing on something that's challenging me, or like you say, keeping me up at night, then I'm stagnating, and I find I start to slip a little bit. Not slip because I don't really struggle with mental health problems, thankfully, but I do find I notice a dip, and then I notice a dip. I can recognize it, and then I pick it up, and I put things in place to then work on it and challenge myself, whether it be with a podcast, whether it be helping someone do something for veterans, or whether it'll be a fitness goal, or coming up with some idea of, I'm toying with the idea of doing a bare knuckle boxing match, just because, why not? I'm 45, I feel like I've got a bit left to give. People are like, don't do it, you're far too handsome, like you said, Des, but no, I'm joking. You can't ruin any knackered lot, look at it. But do you know what I mean? Does that make sense? You've got to constantly challenge.
Yeah. And do you know something now? There's this. I mean, personal development now has become a massive thing, hasn't it, Chris? And I always say it a bit. Well, and I mention that subject now because the second book that come out. By the way, the first one, Bravo 30, was a great success. And I did. I did it with Damian Lewis, co-authored it with him, a great guy, and he helped me a lot write the book. And I thought to myself, nobody's going to like this book and nobody's going to be interested. And it became a bestseller. So we were really pleased. 3 years down the road, I got approached again, and and Damien was involved on this as well, but there were other people involved, and they talked about doing, let's say, personal development, and I didn't quite like the idea of that. But I says, I'll tell you what I will do with this book. I says, I think there's a success format that people might like to hear. And I says, it's something that we do in the regiment, and we call it lessons learnt. So what I said to him, I says, I'll do a book, but can I do it my way? I says, which will be a mixture of, firstly, people can pick it up and just read it as they normally want. It'll be interesting stories of my life, things that I've done in Parachute and what I've done in the SAS. The core of it will be how hard it is getting in Parachute and getting in the SAS. But also I'll do a thing called lessons learnt, I says, because in the SAS, whenever we come off a mission or a task, is that we have like a debrief, and we get our heads together and we go, right, how did that go? What were the good things that went? But more importantly, what didn't work? What were the things that didn't work? And so what I've done with this book, I've done a lessons learned thing as well. So chapter by chapter, I've given a story, a testing story, if you like, that you go, oh yeah, that was a bit rough, and but what I've done, I've got what I learned from that was A, B, C, D, and E, and I'll talk about lessons learned, and I think that in itself is a success format that the regiment's very good at. I mean, the regiment has been going from the Second World War, and we've had a very success format, and I think a lot of it is down to this, what we do, where we hash things out. we're not scared to be self-critical of ourselves. What didn't go well there? We need to change that for next time. So each time we have a task, an opportunity to do something, a mission, an operation, we go, how can we make it better than what we did the last time through the format of lessons learned? So what I've done with this book, I feel it's a good book, chapter by chapter, good stories. You can read it just as a book like that and enjoy it. But there's also a lessons learned of what me personally, what I did, of the lessons that I learned and how I could rectify it, and how next time I come across a difficult situation. By the way, what we've been talking about, Chris, is that how I can make it better next time. And I stamped that into the book. What I think the SAS is very good at is a success format, is how do we make it better next time? In other words, the lessons learnt mindset. And I think is that if you have that in life of, okay, I didn't do too well of what I've just did, but I tell you what, I'm going to learn by the next time. And what I keep hearing, which I don't like sometimes, where they go, we must keep failing. Okay, you've got to fail over and over and over and over again. I don't like using that word failing. I know why they say it, and I understand that mindset stroke format. I'd rather say, and I think I say it in the book, is that I just learned how not to do it. Okay, so the common sense approach is the lessons learned. I learned not to do it like that, but I'm going to do it differently the next time out. And it could be on anything. It could be about your career, your relationships, your finances, your lifestyle, your relationships, your education, it can be anything. Okay, but how do I make it better next time? But hearing this, you'll fail many, many times. Yeah, I suppose we do, but don't look at it like that. Just go, do you know something? It weren't the way I wanted it to be. I'm going to do it better next time. And I'd rather of that approach. I think the personal development field, in my eyes, at this moment in time is crazy, positively crazy, I mean. And that's great because people are wanting to know how they can better their lives. And I can say here categorically, Chris, and I know you're going to agree with me, is that in the military, personal development is just natural to us, isn't it? It's that we get up each day, we get up early, we'll do some physical, let's say at 6 o'clock, we've got a breakfast, then we get together and then we brainstorm what we're going to do for that day, what we're going to do for tomorrow, next week, next month, and in some cases 2 years from now. And then we get on with our day, and there's going to be physical in it, and we're going to be eating good food, and we're going to be together and having meetings, and we're going to be outside, and we're going to be doing pragmatic stuff, and we're going to carry out the tasks and the jobs that we've brainstormed, and we brought other people in and other organizations, and at the end of the day, we're going to get together again, meet, have more food, get to bed early, and then guess what? Get up again next day and do the same thing over and over again. Of course, that pragmatic lifestyle, that routine that I just described, we do it day after day after day after day. And when you think about it, the military, let's talk about Parareg, is that by doing that every day, Chris, is that the jobs that we put the military into, let's say Parareg, we're only talking about Parareg because that's the regiment me and you was in, as well as along with SAS, is that they generally put us in negative situations. In other words, there's a problem, and the problem needs to be sorted out. But the military want a positive outcome, okay? So we have to bring about that. They don't want a negative outcome. That's why we have a good reputation. The military, okay, are good at sorting out problems. We are good at personal development. We do it every single day. We do it without even realize that we're doing it. It just becomes normal to us. And I think that getting individuals like Parareg and the SAS, guys that are of a different disposition, that have come through a certain training, okay, a certain selection process, and now individuals that can carry out certain tasks. The Parachute Regiment have a strong history, okay, and have a tough reputation. The SAS, the same. Most of our jobs have been in very, very difficult situations. but we are always expected to bring about a positive outcome. Okay, and that's why we have the reputation of getting the job done when it needs to get done, and whatever that job is. So we come back to this success format, is that if you are exposed or brought through a certain system, let's say the military system, in our case, we're talking Parareg here in SAS, is that you bring about a certain guy, a certain mindset, okay? And that certain mindset has to be of a successful disposition. We don't want anything less than being successful, okay? And I think that's why we have that esprit de corps, that brotherhood, if you like, okay? And I think from Civvy Street is that, and for the audience, I don't mean that being derogatory, is that we tend to say military life, Civvy Street life, don't we? Is that success format, I think, can be learnt from the military, from military personnel, especially from Parareg and SAS. We tend to be put in quite difficult situations most of the time, don't we, Chris? Yeah, and I think we learn to bring about, because of our disposition, that roughness, toughness, that getting the job done attitude, that it needs a certain type of individual to push through a difficult time, a difficult period, a difficult job, if you like. And I think through talking like we are doing and bringing out, let's say, a book that I've just been brought out, is that people can learn, I think, a format that will help people out there, and especially of late when we're talking a lot about personal development. I think if they can get it from guys like us, and I mean guys like us that are coming from a standpoint of experience, okay, no, we're not sticking our chests out and say we've done this, that, and the other. Okay, what it means is that I think people are more willing to listen to you if you've done a bit, seen a bit, and go, yeah, those guys are speaking from experience. And I always feel humble, when people always ask me. I get it all the time. And I know why they're asking, is because they're looking at you and going, well, this guy's experienced it, done it, he's seen it, or whatever, that mindset anyhow. So I always take my time, and I go, right, I have to spend time with these people because, they're serious and they want to know. So, and I feel humble, if you like, coming on podcasts like this, with an audience is asking and appreciates what you've got to say. But the book in itself, I think, is a success format of lessons learned, especially from Parareg, from the SAS, okay, from being in difficult situations, from bringing about, from a difficult situation, bringing it into a positive, bringing about a positive outcome. And I think that can only be done through coming through, let's say, seasons of our lives and learning things along the way. Chris, would you agree with that?
No, absolutely. Everything you say there makes sense. And there's a few bits I'm trying to remember in the order I was going to say them. But the first bit is really refreshing to, after all these years, still speak like about Parareg. You've gone on and spent 20 years with, arguably the greatest unit on the planet. I personally believe so. I know lots of people do. But, you still talk about the toughness and how difficult Parareg was. And I think that's refreshing. And it's like, it just reinforces my views and, other paratroopers out there and civilians as well, to know that the toughness of training, that what you go through, there's that part. And like you say, the whole seasons, and it's just like everything you've said there, it resonates with me. And I said this to you before. I know you kindly sent me the book, Des, a couple of weeks back. And I said to you before, I was like, I've read a handful of books, not because of the intelligence factor, it's because of my concentration levels. I tend to listen to audiobooks. So I picked this up, and I give you my word, I could not put it down. And that is because I think straight away it starts off, it talks about your upbringing, pretty much a lot of the stuff we've covered today. But there's a lot more in detail in the book, so do definitely get it. It's amazing. But it's like I resonated with it when you were talking about Parareg. It brought back a lot of memories for me when you was talking about Parareg Depot. When you was talking about that at the end of the day, when you crawl in bed at maybe 2:00 in the morning, thinking you've done everything, and then opposite, knowing that you've got to do that again on repeat the next day. and how you see people leave. You do see people leave through Power Depot, don't you? I mean, not as much as selection, I suspect, but you do see the numbers thin out progressively through training, and your body's aching. And you know, I resonate not with selection because I never attempted it. A big regret. Whether I'd have passed, I personally don't think so, but you never know. But it's when you look back, I did P Company 3 times in 6 months, and it was like what you said earlier on about. I never told people that for a long time, and now I kind of quite proud that I managed to push myself to do it 3 times and finally go to Power Edge. But like you said, knowing what was coming, I knew the log race was coming. So when I'm sat there on the 4-tonner traveling out to the training area in silence, pale, blokes were like, "What's wrong with you?" And I'm like, because I know the pain that is coming that brings the log race. I know the pain that's coming that brings the 30 race. And it's really nice to hear a man of your caliber and background with the SAS talking about Power Edge like you have done.
I'm sorry I'm interrupting, but on that, what you said, I can say to your audience now is that if it wasn't, the reason I'm so respectful to Power Edge is, firstly, I spent 8 years there. But I think if it wasn't for Power Edge, I don't think I would have gone to the SAS. And I mean this respectfully. I think we have the best armed forces in the world. I mean, and we have some great heritage. I mean, look at the Guards. You know, nobody does it better than the Guards. You know, I mean, look what's been going off down in London just of late, and especially this year. Nobody does it better than those guys. They have fantastic discipline. You know, not only can they do the sort of stuff, the ceremonial stuff that they do, okay, but in the field as well. You know, I've worked with guardsmen; they have great discipline. But we have, the engineers and the signallers, and we have other fine regiments. I can only speak for Power Edge, is because it's that I joined first and started me off. But I think I speak fondly of Power Edge because, firstly, it gave me that exposure to the SAS. And the reason, I think, being is that it was a time that you couldn't get any information. And there's an airborne brotherhood. We're airborne in Parachute Regiment, and so is the SAS. So there's a link there with the airborne brotherhood. There is more guys from Parachute Regiment actually go to join the SAS, and actually there's over 50%. The makeup of the SAS is made up of guys from Parachute Regiment. And again, I think it's this exposure that I'm talking about, the brotherhood, the training, okay, the toughness, the harshness is what I've talked about. So for me, when I look at Power Edge, it was a stepping stone, if you like, that helped me go forward to the SAS. And it was because of those reasons, the exposure. Okay, I seem to know more. I seem to understand it more. I think, with respect, if I'd been with any other regiment, because there's not a link there through Airborne Brotherhood and through other things, I might not have had that exposure, because I've talked a lot about the stuff that I've done or haven't done. I think I was a reluctant soldier at that time. Power Edge tends to drag you on. You're going to be a soldier no matter what, you know, and puts you in position straight away that you will learn this and you will do that. And we don't want you if you're not going to do that. With respect, I think in other regiments, there's times where you don't have to be a soldier fully, or you might have a trade, or you might do other things. But in Parachute Regiment, you've got to be a soldier no matter what, agreed? And so I think that in itself helped me, okay, go to the SAS. It gave me that link. It gave me that exposure. And as far as then when we talk about the mindset, and I think I had this mindset with Para Reg of this, let's say, stoic, let's call it the stoic mindset that I got with Para Reg. And I can see why Para Reg, I'm told now it's over 50% of guys from Parachute Regiment make up the SAS. And then obviously there's the rest. As people know, I don't know, is that the SAS drill from every single regiment, okay, within the army, but also from the RAF, and also from the Navy. So they go from tri-services and from the Marines, okay? So they do that. And the stoicism for me, I remember a story. I'm remembering the story from the book. I think I said it now. I'll tell it now. Is that I remember on the first day I joined up to do selection. I went on the winter selection, and you turn up on the very first day, and you're out, and there's an instructor at the front, and there must have been about 280 guys, I remember, on the winter selection. I chose to go on the winter selection because I thought I performed better in the colder weather, and there was less guys go on the winter selection than they do on the summer selection. On the summer selection, it's obviously hotter. I mean, look at the weather that we're having today.
Yeah.
And then, and not only that, twice as many people turn up on summer selection. So you might have about 500 guys or so turn up on the summer selection. I'm thinking, well, I've probably got a better chance if I go on the winter one. And I think, I might class myself as a cold weather soldier. So there I am, okay, in January, okay, turning up, and there's 280 guys or so, approximately that. And suddenly I found it was strange because we had an instructor that was just talking to us normally, instead of shouting at us or growling at us. And he said, welcome everyone. Thank you very much for, volunteering for coming on selection. And firstly, can everyone just look around at each other? And I thought, well, that's a strange thing for him to say. So everybody's kind of looking around at each other like that, and I'm looking at guys thinking he looks big and tough, and I look at another guy. I thought he looks like he's got his act together. I looked at another guy, he's got all the gear on. I thought he looks like a go faster guy, and I'm thinking, wow, and all of a sudden I'm feeling, oh no, like what have I done, and then the instructor says, okay, within 4 to 5 weeks, it will be down to less than 50 guys. Okay. And then after a short period, you will go out to the jungle. And then there's a very good possibility that it will be less than 15 guys. So straight away, everyone's looking around at each other going, oh no, here's 280 guys. And there's a good chance there's going to be by the end, less than 15 or less guys, And the very next day, there was approximately, if I can remember, if my mind serves me right, there was approximately 3 to 4 guys that didn't turn up the very next day. And they do that purposely to sight you out, okay?
Yep.
And guess what? What they're saying is that this is the selection process, okay? We feel that you are prepared yourself to come on, one of the hardest tests that you're ever going to come across, in the British military, possibly within the world, arguably within the world. And we expect that you are going to give us your best. And that's part of the selection process. They don't want guys there that are just going to give up, and already you see that 3 to 4 guys gave up. And they were obviously guys that they didn't want. But they were showing you that, if it's not for you, pack it in now, And that kind of, coming from Parachute, I had a stoicism. I had this toughness. All of a sudden, it kind of turned, and I go, okay, then if that's how they want to play, I'll show them that I can do this, and I can do it. But there was different mindsets that were just said, oh, okay, this is too tough for me and whatever, without even doing it. And within the SAS, a lot of people, when they meet me, they often said, oh, we expect you to be bigger. We expect you to be, wider. We expect you to, look like The Rock, look like Arnold Schwarzenegger, or whatever. And I often said this phrase, I go, yeah, you expected me to be 6'5", 25 minutes across the chest, a tin of ratchet grease in one hand and a black whip in the other. I says, but in reality, what you've actually got is a 5'8" Yorkshireman, weighing about 11.5 stone. And you can hardly understand what he's on about, sort of thing, And what the regiment really wants, it just wants guys that are willing to do the job that they are told to do and not give up until they have a positive outcome. And that's and you don't understand that until you get in. Do most guys in the regiment are not into fitness? They're all incredibly fit, but they just need to be fit for task, need to be fit to do the job. They're not bothered how many heaves or dips you could do, or what you can bench press, or what you can squat, or how fast you can run, and what have you. And these guys that are good at marathons, they're guys that do extreme this, that, and the other. When I first went up there, They were guys that had rowed parts of the Atlantic. They were guys that had climbed Everest. They were guys that had done freefall records and stuff. They were guys that had canoed X amount of rivers around UK and what have you. But they were fit. But hardly anybody used to go to the gym. You know, there were only an handful on us that used to go to the gym, and they used to call us gym buffs, you know, them guys. We had an RSM who used to say, if you can't do the SAS lifestyle or selection on beer and fags, we don't want you up here. You know, those guys that need, you know, protein drinks and go fast energy drinks and what have you. And I'm saying that story and showing you that view of it, if you like, is that the mindset that they have is that we want guys up here that can do the job and can do it well and be fit enough to do the job and don't need a gym to do it, you know. Because when you think about it, you know, soldiering is hard. You know, you're cold most of the time. Or what I can remember most of the time about soldiering is being cold and miserable. You know, you've got to deal and wet. You've got to deal with the cold, the wind, the rain, the snow, you know, the elements, the air, the sea, the desert, you know, the mountains. You know, those elements are unforgiving. Those elements are scary. You know, you've got to prepare yourself for them. You've got to get fit. And for most of the time in the gym, a gymnasium does not do that for you. I like going to the gym just like anybody else. I do my heaves and dips and, you know, benching and do all of that stuff. But I soon found out that none of that did me any good when I went up there. Did me no good whatsoever.
Well, it's funny.
Yes, I took up protein drinks. I took them with me and stuff. And I tried them in the jungle. Did me no good whatsoever either. You know.
Well, it's funny you should mention that because it's like what you talked about earlier about the kind of sort of talking yourself out, that stigma of going on selection. And I think for me at a young age in Power Edge, I saw guys that I was in Power Edge with were like Power Edge legends, you know, one fit, switched on. So some of these guys have got distinctions on juniors and seniors, which is, you know, an accolade in itself because they're tough guys.
Yes.
And come back from, you know, juniors with distinctions, and then they've gone on selection and come back off the hills. And like you say, and then you look at them and go, and that's what I did throughout my career, rightly or wrongly. I like to think I have that wisdom that we talked about, that knowledge now, where I don't necessarily make that judgment, but I did back then. I didn't have the extra. I looked at them and I thought, nah, there's no chance I'm going to go on selection and pass if these guys can't. And that was just my attitude back then. I left at a young age. I left at 24 to go and pursue the circus stuff, as we talked about.
Yeah.
And, you know, and like you say, you just kind of sometimes talk yourself out of it and everything else. But yeah,
well, it's a thing, Chris, isn't it? About you again. You've got to know thyself. Even today, I'm a slow burner, and what I mean by that, if I have a decision to make, I can't make it quick, especially important decisions. You know, so I call it a slow burner. You know, and going from Power Edge to the SAS, you know, it was about a couple of year process just thinking about it. You know, and then I got serious and serious and serious. But even today, me and my girlfriend was talking over the weekend about how we make decisions, and we like to think it's a good format. Get as much information as you can. Talk to people about what you're going to do. Find out the subject matter. You know, look at it, analyze it. You know, pros and cons. I do that even today, and I think that's a very, very sensible thing to do. You know, and get good at making the right decisions for you. Okay, it might not be right for him or her or them. Okay, but I know it's the right thing for me. You know, I know sometimes I have to make decisions, you know, that I go, well, this is good for me. So I make this decision for me and mine, if you like, you know. But it's you've got to know how you respond to this, you know, and again, knowing thyself. How do you respond? How, you know, what sort of animal are you? You know, find out what this animal is, you know, how it reacts, how it responds. And you get better at making the right decisions. And when I look back then, I was a slow burner. You know, I kept putting it off. And yes, the fear factors kept raising, and I'd go back and then I'd build up momentum again, and then I'd go back. And this is why I knew, Chris, I knew myself that if I went back on that first selection to then get ready to come back on the second one, I knew that if I lost momentum, I'd finish up not going.
yeah,
And you know, so today I would be sat here and I would be talking of regrets. You know, I would say to you, I had an opportunity, that one opportunity, and I didn't take it. And I've actually talked to guys, you know, that I've done. And now, don't get me wrong, for your listeners, your audience that's listening, there were guys up there, Chris, that were fitter than me. There were guys up there that were better soldiers than me. Okay, there were guys up there that were better looking than me. Okay, so, but for whatever reason, and there was lots of reasons, Chris, you know, just damn bad luck. You know, the weather could have come in, you know, they have an injury. Yeah, and I and you know people that have gone up there that we've been so surprised that didn't stay up there for whatever reason. Okay, they were just really unlucky. You know, and I you know, I seen guys and I thought, well, why didn't that guy get up? You know, and I look back and I think, well, I remember me having bad luck on the first one. You know, and these things in the private life that can stop them from going up there. If you have a family, you've got to think of your family going up there, because it's a harsh life. I mean, I was told when I was up there that the regiment, true or false, I was told this, that we had the highest divorce rate in the British Army, and I can understand why.
Surprised, really.
Yeah, Parachute was up there as well, like, you know, and I can only go, I can't confirm that, I can only go on what I've been told over the years. But yeah, a military life is a very selfish life, isn't it? It's, you know, you've got to think of you, you've got to think of your promotion, you've got to think of the route you're going, etc. And your family is with you, and it's sometimes, well, for definite, you've got to make decisions for them. But when I look back at the decisions that I made at certain times, I look back and think, if I didn't make that decision, or if I made a wrong decision at that time, my life would have gone differently. And I think I would have been bitterly disappointed. I remember, Chris, I know we've touched on this, I remember not wanting anything else as much in my life. I would have given, we have a saying up there, we will give everything if everything is what it takes. I would have given everything to get up there. I remember getting through selection and saying to my mate and going, you know, and these less than 10 guys got through. And I'm saying, we are in, aren't we? We have got in, haven't we? He goes, yeah. He says, I think we have. And I goes, and I remember then a few days later, you know, when we had it confirmed, I says, I wondered what the coming years are going to bring. He goes, yeah. He says, I wondered, Des, you know. And you know something? I look back on that selection back then, which was back in '86, is that all them guys that got through, there weren't many of us, you know, I've talked about numbers in the book, is that they all went on to successful careers, okay, within the regiment. They all had families, you know, we've all bumped into each other around, they're all living around the globe at this moment in time. And what I did notice about the regiment is that when guys actually get in, they have long careers. I had almost 20 years up there, and I didn't plan that at all. You know, I didn't plan going in the army. I didn't plan Parachute. You know, I didn't plan doing books. You know, I didn't plan doing podcasts. It's funny how these come around, but you know, when I look back, you know, at the things that I've done, and I look, I think, how on earth has this come about? And then those guys that come through selection with me have all gone on, had really successful careers. And one thing that I've noticed, that I did notice, when guys go up there, they don't leave. I think it's a point of, I know why guys come here now. This is what we need to do. This is what we're supposed to do. This is, you know, we always joke about, we come through the sausage factory. Okay. And those that come through the sausage factory were all designed a certain way. And as I said, you are now with guys at a very high echelon. You know, I talked about them climbing Everest. I'm mixing with guys who've rode parts of the Atlantic. So what it does, it lifts you up. It lifts you up into this positivity with everyone else. And one good thing about Hereford is that they don't restrict you. They want you to be the best. They look at you, they go, right, you've come through selection. You know, you are good enough to be here now. And now we will turn you into a professional soldier. And whatever that takes, there's certain skills now that you and everybody does the same thing. We've all come through the same sausage factory. They're all passing that knowledge on. Everybody's trying to do the best they possibly can. We're traveling around the world. We're doing great things. You know, I like to think that with the guys in the white hats, You know, we are trying to prevent trouble. We are trying to help people. You know, we are giving advice and information. Okay, we will help if we need to, but once up there, you don't want to leave, and
It's
they don't want you to leave.
though, isn't it? It's the holy grail
Yeah,
of
that's
soul.
it. Yeah,
It's
yeah,
said so
yeah,
many
yeah,
times. I agree. It's like that is you don't. Where do you go then from the military? That is
yeah.
your holy grail of soldiering.
Yeah. No, they don't want you to leave. They'll invest money in you, time in you. Um, they go right. You know, and everybody is at this level. So what is nice is that once you're there, you know, you can have a long career. They don't want you to leave, and I saw very few people leave, you know, and have premature careers. You know, it's they're there. They want you to be there, and have a very long career and enjoy. And I think through being up there, it changes your mindset towards life. And a lot in it, I think people can see that I have a certain view on life. Okay, and there's certain formats, successful formats, I think, that I've used and applied. I've talked about it in the book, and I've talked about some things, you know, in our podcast today. But I think a lot of these things I've learnt over the years, and Para-Reg, definitely, I learnt immense in Para-Reg, which prepared me to go on and do further things in my life. I can't look at that success format without including Para-Reg. I can't. I couldn't have just gone, yeah, and talked about SAS and whatever. Para-Reg is part of that. It prepared me, it got me ready. It created the body, the mindset, the animal, which eventually went on to do more successful things.
No, absolutely, pal. Well, look, I'd love to chat to you, and I'm conscious of the fact that we're on an hour and 45. What I'd like to do, if you're up for it, Des, now, don't feel obliged, but in the future, I'd like to get you back on, and we'll talk about life after you left 2-2, and kind of, because obviously you've got a whole chapter there from the sort of early 2000s that we've already. So if you're happy, Des, at some point, we'll come back
Very
on and
much so.
talk about your life after the SES. But for now, where can we get this, Des?
Okay, probably the easiest ways is that look at me being the big one now. I've got my own official website. So if you Google it and knock out, yeah, look at that, me being a big one. What about that showing off? Is that you can knock up Des Powell official website. And what it does, it takes you on. It actually shows you my two books, my latest one there, Trial by Fire. There's a link where it can send you through, and it'll show you how to get it on the website as well. It tells you some interesting things. It talks about some of my past, and there's some interesting photographs on there and the likes. Or you can go straight to Amazon, okay, and you can get my book straight from there, whichever works for anyone. And by the way, get feedback from some of your audience. If they want me to come back, I would love to come back. In fact, thank you very much for inviting me today, and thanks very much for the invite of coming back and yes, life after the regiment. I think that would be quite good as well.
Pleasure has been all mine. Honestly, the book, guys and girls, I'm not even. You'll see it as soon as you pick it up. I could not put it down. I read it on holiday. I found it truly fascinating from start to finish. The link for the viewers and the followers will be in the bio. You'll have a link to Amazon. You'll have a link to Des's website. I urge you to click on. Go get yourself a copy, have a read. You will not be disappointed. And yet, I know full well the feedback is going to be, yep, get Des on. Let's talk to him more. I know that for a fact. But for now, Des, I will chat to you in a minute off air. But it has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much. Just a quick one to finish off. What have you got? Anything that you can talk about that you've got coming up in the near future? Or is it now pipe and slippers? I doubt that very much.
Well, let's just say I've got the easy life, you know, and people say, I bet you're rushed off your feet, aren't you? And they start doing it. And you know, so answering your question, Chris, there's always people are always asking me to talk. They're always asking me to talk about the book or about stuff that we're doing. I get invited to go down to London and certain organisations and stuff like that. So I've really got the good life. It's fairly easy. It's not stressful anymore. I very much enjoy it. I remember my life was 1,000,000 miles an hour. It's now about 30 miles an hour. So answering your question, that is it. And by the way, just for your audience, for someone who gets my book on holiday and reads it on a sunbed, that is above and beyond, because you sent me a picture of you being on a sunbed with my book. Can I say thank you very much for that? That is serious. Okay, so we're so thanks very much for that, Chris. And by the way, thanks for having me today, and thanks for the shout out for the book. It is very much appreciated.
No problem at all. And for those people that do know me personally, just the fact that me reading a book in the first place is a big deal. So that, honestly, people go, Jesus, if he's reading that, I'm definitely no, look, my pleasure, Dan. Thank you very much for taking the time to come. It has been absolutely brilliant. Thank you very much, pal.
Thanks very much, Chris. Thanks a lot, mate. Cheers.
Hit the ground, no sound but the wind jumped out the sky where the real work begins. Iraq heat, cold steel on the front line, security tight, walking edge of a landmine. Somali seas, deck slick with the salt, eyes sharp, never blink, never halt. Surveillance in the mist, eyes on the prize. UK streets to foreign skies, from fire calls to bare knuckle rings, still fighting demons that memory brings. Oh Kevin, tune in now, feel the truth get louder. This is the old paratrooper, no powder, no script, no mask, no lies, just facts. Mental health raw in boots or slacks, ADHD to the PTS pain. We're breaking silence, not playing games. Old paratrooper podcast, stay locked in. Stories from the edge where the healing begins. Not a saint, just a voice for the ones who never had a fucking choice. From the wire to the ward, from smoke to the dark, every scar on the soul is a battle mark. Memories haunting, can't shake the past, but together we fight, we stand.